Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. The William J. Brooks Community Service Award is presented each year to an individual who has significantly improved the quality of life in Palm Beach. It's named for former Civic Association Director Bill Brooks, who served on the Palm Beach Town Council from 2000 to 2008. Bill, as many of you know, loved Palm Beach. He passed away 6.5 years ago, and he is still greatly missed. He was a dear friend of the Palm Beach Civic Association. This year's award winner is also a dear friend of the Palm Beach Civic Association and a dear friend of Bill Brooks's and a dear friend of the town. David Mack loves Palm Beach, and he has made an incredible positive impact on the community. David is a Civic Association director. He has been coming to Palm Beach for 64 years. He and his wife, Sandra, have lived here for almost 40 years. David serves as the vice chairman of the board of directors of Morse Life and Morse Geriatric Center. He is a member of the Palm Healthcare Foundation. He also serves on the Palm Beach Country Club Board of Governors. He is a former president of the Country Club and currently serves as chairman of the club's Community Relations Committee. David is the first vice president of the Palm Beach Police Foundation. He is the president of the Palm Beach Police Council of 100, and last year he received the Police Foundation's Palm Tree Award for outstanding service. Today it is our privilege, Bob Wright and myself, to present the 2016 Bill Brooks Community Service Award to David Mack. David, will you come forward, please? You want to give him the back?
And Bob,
David, thank you.
You go back so long.
Thank you, thank you, thank
It's
you.
only big things.
I appreciate it. This little token of our appreciation is say anything you want.
Wow. I'm afraid to open it here, though. Ned, thank you. What a humble introduction. Bob, thank you too for all of your time and efforts. And what a wonderful job you do for the Civic Association. It's a tremendous honor for me to receive the Community Service Award. In particular, it's very humbling because Bill Brooks was a longtime friend of mine. And Bill and I always had concurrent ideas about Palm Beach and the good that we both were doing to enhance Palm Beach. He was the consummate Palm Beach citizen. He devoted his life to the community. Bill's service was actually encompassing 3 incredible careers. Local broadcaster, vice president and CEO of Channel 5, public servant on the town council, and a minister. And through it all, Bill's mission always was to preserve and improve our wonderful community. And if Bill Brooks were here today, he'd say, bury those lines. And in that wonderful tradition of Bill's legacy, we all work to make Palm Beach a better place so we can enjoy it and be proud of it. I want to congratulate the board and staff of the Palm Beach Civic Association for all their great work. I want to tell you, this organization has been here for 72 years. I'm not even 72 years old. efforts are outstanding, serving the community. I want to acknowledge my friend, which I did, Bob, the chairman, Bob Wright, again, for his leadership. Ned Barnes, our president, and I really accept this award on behalf of everyone that's here, because we all have the same goal. Let's make Palm Beach great. Michelle Kessler, George Cohen, Robert Needlander, Sue Keenan, thank you for your hard work to make today's luncheon what it is. You have all led us to where Palm Beach is now, this wonderful community. Let's keep it that way. We want to preserve and protect it, and we love the idea of calling this our home. So hopefully tomorrow we'll do our job, and as they say in Chicago, vote early and often. Thank you very, very much.
Very nice.
Stand here while I introduce you?
Is it long?
Yeah, so a little bit.
Okay, well, we'll take it.
I just asked Bob if he wanted to stand up here while I introduced him. He said, "Is it long?" And I said, "Well, yeah, a little bit long." So it's really an honor and a privilege for me to get to introduce the boss, the chairman and CEO of the Palm Beach Civic Association, Bob Wright. Most of you know our keynote speaker today. He's been chairman and CEO of the Civic Association since 2010. And as you know, he's done an incredible job with the organization. Bob is also our neighbor and our friend. He and his wife, Suzanne, have lived in Palm Beach since 1998. Bob has had a diversified career in general management, marketing, and broadcasting. He served as vice chairman of General Electric and president, CEO, and chairman of NBC and NBC Universal from 1986 to 2007. Prior to that, he served as president of General Electric Financial Services, and before that, as president of Cox Cable Communications. Bob is the senior advisor of the THL Capital and serves on the board of directors of Polo Ralph Lauren Corporation, AMC Networks, and is a trustee of the New York Presbyterian Hospital. Bob and Suzanne have been widely recognized for their outstanding achievements. They received the first ever Double Helix Award for Corporate Leadership from Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. In May 2010, they received Honorary Doctorate of Humane Letters degrees from St. John University in Queens, and together they delivered the commencement address as the first married couple ever to do so. In 2008, Bob and Suzanne were selected as 2 of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. Bob is a graduate of the College of Holy Cross and the University of Virginia School of Law. The Wrights have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. As you can see, Bob Wright has had a very busy life so far, and a very, very successful one too. We're very anxious to hear his story today, so please join me in welcoming our esteemed guest and friend, Bob Wright.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to say something before we go on here. Sheriff Bradshaw is here, and we were not going to tolerate any protesters or distractors here at this meeting. Thank you. Thank you. Up! Right over there. Deputy Brown, would you take a look at that man? That's, I know that's name is Robert O'Leary. He's a Bernie Sanders supporter, long-time Democratic operative. There's no place for him here, and his whole table. If they get obnoxious, throw them out. Just throw them out. All right. And take his Bernie signs away from him, too. This book is written about myself and my wife and being together for 50 years, 48 years married. My family is not directly mentioned in the book because that was the idea, but it's all for them. And they participated in our life a lot more than maybe many of your own children because of the type of work that I did, especially with NBC over 22 years. They saw the shows, they knew the people, they went to the parties, they met people in the business and so forth and whatnot. So it's a lot of that is for them. Originally it was going to be 100 pages, but there was a sort of a growth that took place in here that was uncontrollable, sort of like the Vietnam War. We ended up with 400 pages, and that was cut down from maybe 1,000. So it took 3.5 years, and it's memories of all the things that I were involved in, spoken in many cases from the words of people that I work with, because it took a lot of people were involved in this. I just want to say that we started out on our honeymoon in coming back to University of Virginia for my third year in law school. We started out, the next day I started the bar exam process, which you could do at that time. And so Suzanne missed me for right off the bat about 4 or 5 days studying for the bar exam. We got to 1960, we got only in the same year. I got drafted because the deferments ended. And so I joined the Army Reserves, got sent to Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is a lovely spot. The home of the combat infantryman for Vietnam. They had the ability to duplicate all of the weather conditions in Vietnam and the land conditions. I came back and we went in the hospital as we had our first child. Right after that. Oh, by the way, just before I went there, I took the New York bar exam because we were residents of New York. So that was the second one she had to put up with. We ended up for a period of time in Pittsfield, Massachusetts with General Electric, and I was doing legal work, but it was in connection with my Civil Affairs Association, which is a branch of the military that I got in, which was supposed to be for people who were all professional people, lawyers, engineers, people of that nature, that could actually mind a town when a town was pacified enough to allow the infrastructure to be brought back in a wartime area. Fortunately for me, I never got called to Vietnam because they never found such a town. During the whole time of 5 years, from 1968 to 1973, they never found a town that was safe enough to actually perform. And that was sort of another tale of that sort of thing. But we came down in 1970. I went and clerked for a federal judge in New Jersey. It was a marvelous time. I had mafia trials. I had all kinds of great things. Sam the Plumber, if some of you might remember, it was the first book that the FBI ever allowed to be published. It was a paperback with all the wiretaps because it was the first RICO trial, a racket trial that they ever had. And I took another bar exam, the last one, in New Jersey. Suzanne had to put up with that. She had to move 4 times during that year and a half. We didn't have any money. So what we did was we rented and did what we never did. I did get the opportunity to join a very good law firm, and the manager of that firm is Ralph Del Deo. I don't know if Ralph is here today. He comes to most of our meetings. Ralph, there he is. Ralph was a spectacular person. He was the managing director of this law firm, and he and I lived and worked outside of Newark, and Ralph was an expert in real estate. We had our own office, the two of us together. He taught me a great deal. He talked to me about how to manage clients. He talked to me about how to deal with a lot of things that you wouldn't know unless you had somebody like Ralph with him. He was very smart. Ralph knew about everything. He had some huge pharmaceutical clients at the time. But he also loved, he was a dog judge, he was a field judge, and he was a hunter at the time. He has RP now, And so he doesn't have his use of his sight anymore. He's been down here for a number of years, and he's a great guy, and his family's terrific. And his son-in-law is my doctor down here, Earl Campazzi. So Ralph, thank you very much for being here. I went back to, it's a long story that I won't tell you. When I went back to Massachusetts to work in Jack Welch's business, which was very, very big at that time, growing rapidly. And I got a chance to do, I was actually one more bar exam. That was the Massachusetts bar exam. That too, that was the last one. We had a whole bunch of wonderful times there, and we moved about 3 or 4 times in that place. We moved 11 times before I was 40. So Suzanne is a real trooper. She really was. And we did everything we possibly could to be comfortable that what we were doing was the right thing. We moved to Atlanta in 1980 to be the head of Cox Communications. At that time, Cox was selling its business to GE. They were selling the radio, the television business, and their cable television business. And they were keeping the newspapers. Because they were fearful of what was going to happen with media, and media was changing, and they thought they had maybe could protect themselves, and that was a good time to sell. It didn't actually take place. I went down there, and I stayed for 3.5 years. So I worked for the Cox family for 3.5 years, and there is a connection between, as I'm sure most of you know, between James Cox Kennedy and Sarah Kennedy Cox. And Sarah is one of the heirs to the Breakers Hotel and the Flagler history, and Jim Cox is the principal heir to the Cox fortune. So they were a very unusually strong couple, and a wonderful couple for a long time. At that point in time, I started to formulate. I had a chance to manage businesses after my legal career. It became a business career really in the early 70s. And I had a chance to manage a number of businesses, and it gave me a lot of confidence. And I kind of opted for a creed that I've used for the rest of my business career. And that was that you have to accept responsibility. If you're ambitious and you really want to succeed, you don't have to be ambitious, but if you are ambitious and you want to succeed, then you must accept responsibility for everything you do. You have to take the good and the bad. You can't be looking for excuses. You can't sit on excuses. There's no excuse that has meaningness. It just happens. That's the way it is. You move on. Now, if you're making a lot of bad decisions, you're going to kind of rethink the process probably. But if you're going to take advantage, you're going to have to still accept them. You need passion, and you need a lot of passion if you're going to try to accomplish something, because you're going to have tough days, you're going to have issues, and you're going to have to show other people, if you want to lead them, that you really have the passion that they can rely on themselves. And lastly, you need to maintain as much control as you can over your ideas and the work that you're trying to do. And if you can do that, then you can be an entrepreneur inside of a large business. You can be successful inside of a large business. There are many people here that have shared a background similar to that. And I mentioned last night at a dinner that one of them was sitting in front of me last night, which is Howard Kessler, who did essentially the same thing with a very large bank. They banked National Bank of Maryland. He was in a bank, and he ended up becoming an expert in affinity credit cards. He built up a whole practice in the bank, but rather than moving on or having the bank, he negotiated to have a contract to do that for the bank. And that negotiation started a long time ago, from 1982 to today, and it's a very successful business. And he's done it with accepting responsibility, passion, and control. And many others have done the same thing. I was saying to the Frisbees, who we know from Nantucket as well as here, that's kind of way that they do with their building program. They accept the responsibility. They go out, they make the decision. They've got a lot of passion, and they don't put themselves at such risk that they could lose the whole thing. It's really very, very sensible program. Anyway, we get to Cox was a wonderful experience. We got all around, and that's where I met a man who was going to be my partner, it seemed, for the rest of my life, and that's Sitting right in front of me is Chuck Dolan. And Chuck Dolan and Helen, would you just stand up for a second? You only have to do this once. And Chuck just turned 89, and his lovely wife is 88. A younger lady, married a younger lady. We were very active at Cox. I had a lot of authority. We got franchises in New Orleans, Tucson, Brooklyn, Omaha, Portland, Vancouver, Staten Island. In every case, we had partners in these ventures, and we had partners with Chuck Dolan. We formed a partnership very soon called Rainbow Properties, which he had put together, included Bravo, and included some other channels that we were a partner in when I was at Cox, and that began a long-term relationship with him. It was to take you on. Later on, when I had left Cox and was with NBC, we were doing the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. And we also, the first thing I did when we got to NBC was we formed a partnership with Chuck, a similar partnership to what we had with Cox, but a new one with NBC. And that included his sports channels. He had half a dozen sports channels, which were all bleeding cash. And we had CNBC just started, which was bleeding cash as well. And he had Sports Channel New York, which had a lot of profitability opportunity because it was the outlet for the Madison Square Garden. So we entered into a partnership with him at NBC. It was a 50-50 partnership. And one of the people that was in that business at the time was a fellow by the name of Josh Sapin. Josh Sapin is currently and has been the CEO of AMC Networks, which is a business that I sit on the board of to this day. So that relationship and that's controlled by the Dolan family. That relationship goes back all the way back to the 1980, the beginning of that. Well, in 1992, Chuck called me up, or 91, and he said, "Listen, you have the Olympics, and we would really think, why don't we do a triple cast?" Or no, we didn't call it that, and we call it later. Why don't we do a cable cast during the Olympics? We have all of these organizations, yachting, equestrian in particular, because daughter Debbie is an equestrian, an Olympic equestrian, and so all these people don't get to see anything in the Olympics because it's not covered by television. None of this was covered by television. So we came up, and the long and short answer is we agreed to do a partnership, 50-50, and we created the triple cast, which was 3 channels, and they were going all day long, that were separate from NBC, and they covered all the events that were not covered by the networks, by our own network. And it was yachting, and it was out in the water, and it was everything. It was ping pong, it was every single sport. We picked sports that had a lot of following in the United States. Unfortunately, the following didn't turn into subscriptions. It was $100 for 2.5 weeks of continuous coverage of everything. But the marketing didn't make it. We just didn't get it out fast enough. Cable operators were sketchy about it. Broadcasters, of course, hated it. And my own people hated it. Everybody hated it. We got into this thing. And when the whole thing was over, we had lost $100 million. Well, that was not exactly Jack Welch's happiest day. But as I told him, he only lost half of it because Chuck lost the other half. So Jack said, he's not going to pay you back on that. I said, why? Why? He said, he doesn't have the money either. He's not going to do that. He's not going to be able to pay you back. So it was we had a contract, and about 3 months later, I got a messenger came to my office in New York with an envelope, and I opened it up, and it was a check for $50 million from Chuck Dolan, which I promptly raced home to Connecticut. And Jack lived very nearby, and I walked to his door, and I said, you know that problem with the Olympics? He said, you had to bring that up as if we don't know that? He He said, I just want you to open this, and opened it up, and he said, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. It was a check of $50 million right on the bear. It was great. It was a great time, and Chuck went on. He got later on. It wasn't too long after that Chuck asked us. He called me up on Saturday morning. He said, "You want to buy Madison Square Garden, and you want to buy Madison Square Garden in Radio City, or do you want to buy Paramount and Madison Square Garden in Radio City, because it's being sold now?" And he said, I don't have that kind of money. He said, but you guys could invest in this. We could work this out in terms of because I need financing. I said, I'm sure you need financing, but I said, this isn't going to work because GE was always under pressure that this wasn't an entertainment company, NBC, and none of the analysts wanted to be in the entertainment business. So it was like we weren't in the entertainment business. We were in the news sports business. We had entertainment, but so this was this. So he said, let's cut it back. Let's just do Radio City and Madison Square Garden, Radio City. We get the two teams, the Rangers and the Knicks, and we get radio and the Music Center and so forth. So I ran that around the track at GE, but there weren't any takers on that either. So he went on his own, and it's turned into be a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Just sold Cablevision, which was not part of it. But he just sold Cablevision, or in the process of selling it for, I don't know, what is it, $10 billion, $12 billion? It's an awful lot. And it goes mostly to the Dolans, which is even better. But they also spun off Madison Square Garden, public company. They spun off the Rangers and the Knicks as part of it, as part of the Garden and Rangers and Knicks, two separate. We have three stocks now that represent that, along with American Movie Classics Network. So it was a great. Shortly thereafter, we got together on an idea for DirecTV. And this time we brought in Rupert Murdoch and John Malone. And it was 1991, and we went to the St. Regis Hotel. Remember? And we took our handkerchiefs and we waved them. And it really was the Dish Network, if you will. But we were going to do this because it was only, it's the size of the receiver. And the only thing was that we didn't have any money. All of us didn't have enough money to get financing. We couldn't get financing, even though we had some support from Hughes. Okay, that didn't happen. A few years later, 2 or 3 years later, we go back to the table. This time, John Malone's in control of DirecTV, and he's looking for money. And we had a chance at NBC for a $40 million investment to take a 20% position in it. And Chuck, we were all together, and that one we thought we had done. But I couldn't convince GE to go in it. That $40 million investment is a $40 billion company today. So we were all on the right track on that one, Chuck. But that was probably the biggest loss of the thing. We had some other really good hits. So we actually ended up buying out, selling our stock in Rainbow later on. And the last piece was sold in 2002, which was Bravo, which came to NBC. So there's a long relationship of transactions and deals that some mostly happened or didn't happen, and everybody came out at the end very well. And it's been a great time to be with you, Chuck, all these many years, and so I'm so happy you could be down here now. Thank you. Now, we had, we also, when we went into television, you have to understand that when I went into television in 1980, and then I got to NBC, 1980, I saw all the possibilities of cable television. We were very active. When I got to NBC, broadcast networks couldn't own any entertainment shows. Couldn't own them. Couldn't produce them and own them. And they rented them. They only had 2 airings, once in the winter and once in the summer. That's it. And they couldn't syndicate them, anybody. And most of the guys were kind of okay with that. I said, this is the worst business plan I've ever seen. Why do we have to? They had rules that had been very put in and had a lot of lobbyists supporting him, mostly Hollywood. And I spent about 2.5 years of my life, it seems, in the early 90s, is getting those rules changed. They were called the financial regulation models for broadcasting. And we got it changed so you could now own, produce, and syndicate your own programs. And today that makes the whole difference in the world. And NBC is one of the biggest ones today of doing that, along with others. That was just a change of what way we looked at. We looked at television as in such a narrow fashion. And today now you look at it in streaming and everything's available all the time or anywhere you want. Probably not everything, but most things. So it's a whole new world of issues. During that period of time, Suzanne and I got to know Johnny Carson very well. And we went and did a number of trips with Johnny before and after he left the air. And they're just, wonderful. There's some wonderful stories in there. We went to Russia in 1990. This was a year before it really fell, really before it collapsed. Gorbachev was still there, but it was hanging on. And we were in Moscow, actually, at the time. And you could just sense the sort of the deterioration of the old government, and there's no new government coming in. And Johnny, in preparation for the trip, learned to speak Russian. And he's really gifted. Johnny was in the Navy in World War II, and he was pulled out of his, he was just a seaman, pulled out and sent to decoding school. And he spent most of the war in decoding. And they always say, Sumner Redstone always brags that that's what happened to him. I could say, Johnny, you sit next to Sumner Redstone, maybe. You were sitting next to each other all during the time, and you had no idea. So he was very good. He learned to speak Russian. And he didn't learn to just understand it. He learned to speak it. And we went to, the best time was we didn't want to go to we wanted to go to a real Russian restaurant during the day. We wanted to see real Russian people, which was very hard to do for foreigners. But we got into a place where a lot of workers were in. They were coming in. They were outdoor guys, and we were sitting at big tables sort of like this size. And in the middle of the table was a huge pile of mystery meat, and dark beef with gravy. That's what we used to call it in college. You don't know exactly what it is, but there it is, and a lot of vodka. And these guys were sitting next to us at the table, and somehow strange, Johnny said something, and some guy tapped him on the shoulder. And he said Johnny spoke to him in Russian, and the guy asked him to come over to the table. So within about 3 or 4 minutes, Johnny's sitting at the table with the guys, just like this, and he's telling jokes in Russian. And because he's talking and they're laughing. And he's talking and they're laughing. He's talking and they're laughing. And they're all going, they're clapping then. It's like a show. And he gets up and he comes over, and they come over, and they didn't really know who he was, but some of them did. They found out something, so they wanted to writing down things. And everywhere we went, he could speak to anybody, and it was just remarkable. We also, at 94, 4 years later, we went to the Serengeti Plains for a week. And we went to Arusha. We came in through Arusha, and we went out through Nairobi, but we were on the plains. And we were in a big convoy and trucks and stuff like this. And there's just 4 of us, Suzanne and I and Johnny and his wife, Alex. And Johnny is doing the same thing. He learned to speak Swahili before we took the trip. And he was practicing on everybody. We had no idea what he was saying. Again, people were remarking, they were talking, and then they were laughing. And at night, when we're trying to get to sleep out there, he's at a bonfire with all the guys, the porters, and the shepherds, a whole bunch of them. He's telling jokes again, and sitting at the campfire, and they were like, they loved this guy. They thought this is the best thing they've ever seen. So he was a very, very unusual person, and I'd say one more story was we went to Juneau, Alaska, and we were going to Sitka, and we went down to Thomas Bay. It's a bay south of Juneau where you go in, and it ends with the glacier that's hanging right at the end of the bay. It's a spectacular scene. And the glacier's like several hundred feet high, and it's breaking off slowly, not like, you know, on top of your head, but it's dripping and breaking off slowly into this water, and it's not very, it narrows down. So we get down there in this boat, we have a pretty large boat, we get down there, and another boat comes along behind us. We see it, and it starts to pass us. It's a bigger boat. It's a cruise ship, some sort, and it gets, but it's a different, funny structure. And it gets near us, and Johnny's standing out in the front of the boat with me at the bow. And then we see a few guys come out, and they're waving. They're waving at Johnny. Johnny's waving them back. They're about from here to that wall over there, maybe. And all of a sudden, there are a few more guys coming out. And pretty soon, there are a few more guys coming out. Pretty soon, there are guys coming out from 3 decks. It was a gay cruise. And they were all crazy about Johnny. And they're all hanging off the boat, and I'm going, is that thing listening? You know, because it's not a, and Johnny goes like this. So he goes to the side, and he just looked at me and said, they really like the show. But we didn't figure it out too quickly. During that period with NBC, we also I was trying desperately to buy CNN. And Ted Turner was desperately trying to buy NBC. So this is an unusual negotiation when one party is trying to buy the other. So we had several meetings about this whole thing. And he offered to, we had a price, it was $30 a share or something like that. And we weren't going to get to that. So we got to like 25 or 6, and we decided to have a meeting in Atlanta. So we went down to Atlanta, met at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, Jack Welch, myself, and Ted Turner. And Jack didn't, and at that time Turner was saying everything nasty about, you know, Time Warner, where he was a vice chairman. So Jack was, you know, he just didn't think this could possibly work. So we get down there. The numbers were great, though. The numbers worked. We get down there, and we're having this conversation, and Jack is going like, you know, Turner said, well, I have to be on the board. He said, no, you can't be on the board. We can't have you on the board. And he said, well, I have to be a vice chairman. And he said, no, you can't be a vice chairman. And he said, why? You afraid of me? And he goes into all these hysterics about how he's really not an uncontrollable guy. And that's one where he started barking. And he started barking, showing, I could sit down, you know, I could be good. I could be good. And this went on for a while, and then it didn't go on. And so he concluded that GE was never going to accept him as a senior executive, and Jack concluded that it was too much of an issue to deal with him. So the meeting was over, and that was probably one of the best deals we ever didn't do. But it's one of those things. That sort of thing happens. The last one here is with Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld was an extremely talented guy, and he was writing the show in 1995 and 96. He was writing the show and himself, and the strain was getting to be pretty bad, but he was getting very well paid. He was making millions of dollars. Now, we didn't own the show, and Sony and Time Warner and Warner Brothers owned the show, so the syndication rights were with somebody else. We were paying for the show and airing it, getting the 2 airings that I was talking about. But it was so popular, it was the #1 show on television for quite a while. So we came up with a negotiation. I represented us, and he had his own negotiators. But I also worked with Jerry, and it came down to a meeting on Sunday morning in New York at my apartment. And it was just Jack and I representing NBC and GE, and 2 managers representing Jerry. And so the final deal was one, we were going to do 23 episodes for the next season for $67 million. Now this is like 1996 or something, 97. And we have this meeting, he goes through, and he looks like it's making pretty good progress and so forth. And Jerry says, well, I don't want to make the decision right here. I'll call you back. So the meeting's over, and Jack said, why is he hesitating? He's got $67 million and only has to do 23 shows. I said, he's very nervous about this. He said, well, you're going to be very nervous for that. It's such a great deal. So he calls me back the next morning. He said, I don't want to do it. And so I called up Jack, and he says, what? What do you mean he doesn't want to do it? He said he doesn't want to do it. He said it's $67 million for 1 year. He said, nope, he doesn't want to do it. And it was probably the right decision because his mind was not there, and the writing was tough. And he was worried he couldn't keep up with himself, that it wouldn't be as good and wouldn't be as good. Well, it turned out he was really right because the syndication value became the largest syndication value of any television show ever. They're still selling it. And he gets a pretty good piece out of that, and so he's made a ton of money. But I think that was one of those times where you couldn't believe that this wouldn't work out. There's one thing I want to talk a little bit about Autism Speak because it's very important for me to say that. We founded Autism Speaks in 2005, but it really was 2004 we put the organization together. We've raised $570 million. We have 100 walks around the country, which have raised about $250 million during that period of time. It cost American families about $250 billion a year to deal with autism, almost all of which they pay for themselves. That's how we got into this. There was no insurance. There was no no reimbursement whatsoever. And one of the parents would generally have to quit work. So you've got a lot of lost income. So that became a real priority for us. And we've tried to do everything possible. We've got awareness programs. Suzanne was responsible for all that awareness. And we did things, especially getting a World Autism Awareness Day, working with the WHO, Light Up the Blue. It's a worldwide piece, and BBD&O Advertising Council partnership, $400 million of media value. So it's been a long thing, and I mention this because Suzanne is so much of a part of this and has been so much of a part of all of that to this very day. I would say this, and where she's also been a part of, we had the privilege of meeting and being with 7 presidents in the time that I was working, none of which were fundraisers. The first one was in 1976. We were living in Pittsfield, and I got a call from Mayor Evan Dobell of Pittsfield, and he wanted me to come meet Governor Jimmy Carter for breakfast because he was running for president. And I said, Jimmy, who is running for president? Really? I made him, and that was a very strange meeting. Jimmy is just like he is on television. He's quiet almost and very reserved. And I said, this doesn't, he's Admiral Rickover's appointee, though. I mean, he had a tremendous history. But that was a different guy. In 1988, Jack Welch and myself and Suzanne were invited to John McLaughlin's home in Washington with his wife, Ann McLaughlin, now Ann Carlogas, who's a very good friend of ours. And we went to it was a dinner, and we got there, and it's a smallish house, a very nice house, but smallish. And all of a sudden we get in, and it's overtaken by Secret Service. The guest was Ronald Reagan. Reagan was coming to have dinner with John McLaughlin and us. And he sat there at the table, and he was absolutely charming. And he was very sharp. He was very inquisitive. Gave us some stories, talked about things, had a regular dinner, and left. And it was just one of those things that came out of the blue. There was no political motivation. It was something he wanted to see Jack. He wanted to see him, touch him, feel him. It's not with a crowd. And it was a wonderful occasion. Between 1986 and all the way up to 2000, we had Christmas in Washington every year, which was in the first week in December. And it was a televised event. And it was with the family, the first family, and our first family, and all kinds of political people would come to this. And so we got to meet and be with the first families, with the Bushes and with the Clintons, and Reagans, all during that period of time. In 1989, I met George Bush many times, and I have to tell you, this man was really something special. He formed a committee called the Points of Light, and I was one of the people on it. There were only 20 of us. Took us out to Camp David, took us to Medicine, Washington. He wanted us to go to our communities and do something important. He wanted to show volunteerism at the highest level. And Points of Light went on for some time, and he had a lot of really good people doing this. He was just a very, very special individual. And a lot of times with Clinton, there was a lot of policy. There was a lot of drug issues during that period of time. And the last one I mentioned is we had meetings with the George Bush in 2005 and 6, a number of different occasions. But I'll tell you one quick one, because I know I'm taking too much time, but it's fun. We go down to, we have a movie called Cinderella Man. And it stars Russell Crowe, who was a huge star in that time. Russell Crowe had done The Gladiator. He'd done The Insider, the tobacco one. He'd done the movie. He'd done. Ron Howard was the actual producer of this movie, Cinderella Man. So we're flying down, and he's supposed to come down with us. So just before we get on the plane to fly down to Washington for this late afternoon showing with George Bush and his family and us, we get a call that he's been arrested in New York in a hotel for throwing a phone at an employee, and they thought it was assault on this employee. And of course, the papers were starting to make a big deal about it. So we can't take him. And they called up and they said, no, you can't bring him. You can't bring him. So here we have this whole thing built around him to go down there. And we got the movie, we got all the stuff, and he's back sitting in a police station in Manhattan explaining that he really wasn't trying to hurt anybody with the phone. It was just accidental when he threw it 20 feet, that somebody happened to be there. But it's one of those things you just kind of, you sort of ignore and move on, but it was a lot of fun. So I just want to thank you all for this, and I also want to make a special thanks to Suzanne, who's going through a horrible period with a disease that we don't have enough information about, and we're doing everything we possibly can to create data that is relevant to her particular condition, but it is an enormous challenge. So on behalf of Suzanne and I, thank you very much. Please enjoy the book. It is a labor of love, but